Well, it's always great to have you on the Jesus Culture Podcast. We're joined today by somebody new who we'll get to in just a second. But Phil, you're not new.
Not new.
You're one of the regular hosts.
I am now as regular as it gets.
Maybe the host. Would you say that you're the host of the Jesus Culture Podcast?
I come, I take over.
You know what's wrong with that is that Becky actually was hoping for that.
Making things all about me is one of my favorite things to do.
It's a gift.
Yeah, it's really
a gift. It's on the Strength Finders list somewhere. Making things about me. You got to work hard at that type of gift.
Oh man, if you don't train it year after year after year,
you lose it.
You just lose it.
You don't use that gift. And we are joined today, and we're gonna say why you're on the Jesus Culture Podcast today, but by Nate Edwardson, pastor of the Stirring in Redding, California.
Love it. Love being here. And I would love to know why I'm on the podcast as well.
I'm going to tell you why you're on the podcast in just a moment. But whenever we talk about Nate Edwardson from the Stirring in Redding, you probably always have to clarify that there is another church in Redding.
There's another church in Redding.
Is this what, when you say you're from Redding, first thing out of people's mouth?
Anywhere I go in the world, any city I go, people are shocked. Oh, wow, there's another church in Redding. And I'm like, there's another church.
And if they love Bethel, they're going, why would they go to your church?
Exactly.
This is what they're thinking, like, we love Bethel, we love the teachings, we love the worship. Tell me why people would attend your church at all if they lived in Redding.
People have actually asked me that. They're like, that's so strange. Like, you're in Redding and you don't go to Bethel. And I'm like,
they're wondering why you don't go to Bethel.
I'm 8 minutes down the road. And sometimes when we talk about Bethel, we talk about the little church down the road. And everyone kind of laughs because it's not true.
It's amazing. You have to tell the story. I get you to tell the story all the time, but about what you overheard. Didn't you overhear about how they described your church compared to Bethel?
Yeah, so years ago, I'm at Starbucks in our city, and
heard this story?
I overhear these young adults, and they're talking about the Stirring. And so for a moment, I'm just thrilled. I'm like, oh, God, give us a generation.
They know my church.
Give us a generation, God. Give us young adults.
And give us a harvest of souls amongst young adults, God.
So I'm hearing them talk about the Stirring, and I eavesdrop. I kind of lean in. I'm like, they have no idea I'm the pastor of the Stirring. And I lean in enough to hear one girl say to her friend, in this group of friends, yeah, I hear Stirring's great. It's like Bethel Light. That's what I hear, Bethel Light. And everything in me is like, oh, Jesus. What do I say?
It's amazing.
You can't interrupt. Like, hey, I'm the pastor, and it's not Bethel Light.
We kind of believe in the supernatural.
Later on, somebody said our tagline should be like half the parking lot and half the spirit.
Yes.
Bethel Light, So.
When you can't handle the full thing,
Easier parking.
Exactly.
It makes me think, when you get Diet Coke in Europe, but it's Coke Light.
Yes, totally.
Exactly. So,
all right, well, it's great to have the pastor of Bethel Light here with us.
All right, so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So the name, the Stirring, are there times, like, I love the name, but there are times where you're like, we have the greatest name for our church, and there are times where you're like, I cannot believe we named our church this. Banning wouldn't understand this conversation because Jesus Culture is, in my opinion, just the coolest church name that could exist. So every one of us has to figure it out. But I want to hear from you.
So Phil,
my church is named The Square. So we have this kind of...
Well, we're really good friends.
Yes.
But you've never, ever told me you don't like the name of our church before.
No, I do.
And we get onto a podcast. I'm brought onto a podcast.
He's bringing it on right now.
And he's like,
I
hey,
liked it.
You're like,
hey,
real honest question. I'm going to take this opportunity to ask.
understand how you got to that lame name.
Yeah, exactly. Like, hey, it's 13 years and you still have the name The Stirring.
Did you mishear what I said? I liked
Phil,
the name
this
of
is
your
not
church.
the purpose of this podcast.
You said Banning has the perfect church name ever. So Nate, how did you end up with the lamest church name?
No, which means you can trust the fact that I like the name of your church.
I like the
Do you
name.
ever want to change the name of your church?
Okay, so 10 years in, I contemplated changing the name. If I were to change the name, I would have changed it to Legacy Church. But a friend of mine already stole that in Nashville. So
completely stole it, Lyle Phillips.
But I thought about it.
Sure.
But we have bumper stickers around the city, and it would just be a hassle to have people take the bumper sticker off and put a new one on.
I love it. I love the name of The Stirring.
But
I
no,
think it's
for
an
real,
incredible name for it.
for real,
backtracking.
there have been times like back in the 90s when we came up, you know what I mean? Like in the early 2000s, Stirring was like, this is the coolest name ever. There have been times where I'm like, wow, it it actually sounds a little more cultish.
Yes.
There are times where I'm like, would I go, if I didn't know Jesus and I was interested in church, would I go to the Stirring? I don't know. But the cool thing is we opened a coffee house.
Yeah,
So
perfect.
people are like, no, that's not the church name. That's
just
the
a
coffee house name. And you can come to church here too.
Yes.
But would you agree that part of your, because you're a creative, like you're almost pastor second, creative first,
Absolutely.
that the creative in you is bored, gets bored of things that have been around for a long time, like a name?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. I whether it's a
amazing.
name or the color of a wall or doing that Oh How He Loves song over and over again, I'm so tired of just the old Jesus culture songs.
No,
like,
I'm
come
sorry.
on.
If you don't
But the
put-
new album, that new album is incredible,
Thank you.
man.
If you don't play Reckless Love, No Longer Slaves, I'm not sure it's a legitimate worship
I'm
song.
not sure that you can live in Reading.
No, you can't at all.
If we don't have a Bethel song in our set list every single weekend,
It's required by
we're-
city ordinance now.
Well,
is what
yeah,
I've
it's
heard.
definitely.
So here's the thing. Okay, so with our church name, the Square, right? I think it's I'm putting myself
You're like-
third out of third place.
You're like
here.
a sister church,
Yes.
the Stirring and the Square.
Listen, there are times where I'm like, it is the greatest name. It is unique, and it's anyways, you kind of have to think about it to figure it out what the heart behind it is. But then I was at a city council meeting. They have like pastors come and pray for the city council meeting, and the mayor introduces me, and he goes, "This is Phil Manginelli, and he pastors the Church of the Square."
Oh, the Church of the
The
Square.
way he said it, I just imagined like this instant vision
That's
of
a
like
cult. That's a
that
cult.
is-
white robes.
Yes. Everyone in that room was like, I never want to talk to that guy ever again.
Ever.
And I was like, we have to change our name. Now, in that moment, I just felt this deep sense of why
lot
did
to
we
change
do
names.
this?
It's too much work.
No, it's too much
Oh,
work. We're
man.
gonna
It's
stick with the
everybody
Square.
else.
Wow.
Okay, listen, we're going to talk about church today, but Nate, since you are a co-host, guest host, you're actually on the podcast today because Becky wasn't able to be here today, so we had you jump on because you're here in town recording the first of our new podcast we're launching called The Pastor's Podcast. That's how talking about a name that just is The Pastor's Podcast. And it's going to be a podcast for pastors, those that are leading in church. So we just said we'll jump into this one real quick. But here's the question we have for you. Quarantine life, which it's not quite quarantine life right now, but quarantine, shut down life. Favorite thing about it, worst thing about it.
Yeah, great questions. And I would say my favorite thing about quarantine life is it really shifted the pace of ministry, life, and family. And for us, there was a sense of a forced season to slow down. Some of the things that you couldn't normally not do, or areas where, hey, we've got to keep the thing going. With all of that gone, there was a sense of like, wow, we have unhurried space right now, which, I would say on one hand for our family became a real beautiful time of leaning in, getting more creative. I would say on the church side, that kind of space, even though there were moments it might have spun us out, for the most part, the gift was, wow, we can actually reassess what we're doing. And I think one of the gifts in quarantine, one of the gifts in pandemic for us has been a refocus on the things that actually matter to Jesus.
Yeah.
And things that we will not go back to. I would say the worst.
What do you not like about it? Obviously, there's things that we don't like about it, but what would stand out most to you that you're like, I don't like this about it?
Yeah, I think for me the hardest part of quarantine is probably the same thing, just slowing down.
Here's what I love the most: slowing down. Here's what I hate the most: slowing down.
I mean, we just love pioneering and so every week seeming to be every week felt like a different decision had to be made, or every week is a different chapter of the story. And I think slowing down the slowing down was the best thing and the worst thing. We've also been navigating a lot of pain in people's lives. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons is because when you slow down, you start having to face things that you don't actually face when you're running so fast. And so the gift is I've had to slow down and face things. The dark side of that is it's affected marriages. We've had more marriages implode. We've had people spinning out because the deep things that were already there got exposed. COVID didn't cause it, you know, but COVID maybe exposed some of those
Yeah.
things. So
Well, listen, guys, I'm excited. We're actually sad. I know that last episode we took some time and made fun of Becky, I think.
know.
Maybe a little bit.
Yes, we did.
She's not listening anyway. So
I
doesn't
miss
matter.
Becky.
We
Yeah,
do.
Becky.
I feel so bad I
Nate, I'm
replaced
happy-
her right
I'm
now.
Actually, Becky's obviously a huge part of the podcast for us and a delightful part.
While I'm happy you're here, I do miss her. I'm ready.
Yes.
I'm ready
Yeah,
for the break to be over.
We're ready for Becky to come back, and she'll be back soon enough. But we are going to be having some conversations. We're glad that you're here today. And we get to jump into what it actually means to be a part of a local church. I think it's a conversation that's coming up right now that we need to talk about with 3 pastors. So we're going to do that. So I guess here's the question and the topic that I'd like to go after on this podcast. And Nate, with you here, it works great. I think maybe this is a little bit of a biased conversation because we're 3 senior pastors talking about what does it mean to be a part of a local church. But I think that obviously this is what we've given our lives for and believe deeply in, that people should be plugged in and part of the family called a local church. But I think in the midst of all that's happening, whether it's not meeting in person, well, Georgia started meeting in person like 2 weeks after the shutdown.
Yeah,
That's
we
what it
never
felt
really
like.
shut down. Yes.
Are there churches that probably never that you guys jumped in quick though to start
That's a
meeting
great
again?
question.
It is amazing, isn't it, being from California and seeing how different
So
Georgia.
different.
Yeah, I mean, I literally think we are the only church that is not currently meeting in our city. And I think most churches were meeting starting in late April.
Is that because you're full of fear?
Just, listen, just a spirit of fear is
that a lack of
control our
faith?
lives. This is what this whole podcast really
That's
needs
what
to
we're
be
going to be calling you out. We were calling Nate out about the name of his church. We'd like to call you out while you're not meeting
right.
in person.
That's right.
But I think not meeting in person, there are so many different takes and opinions on what does it actually mean to be a part of a local church? What is a local church? Everybody's got their opinions on even what the church is. And are they talking about the global church? Are they talking about the local church? So this is the question. And I would love to talk in the midst of it about what's it look like to contribute and covering and how we seem to stray from that because we feel like it's controlling or whatever else. But this would be the question I'd ask right now. And we'll start with you, Phil, since you're always the one that seems to have the sound bites in this podcast. What does it actually mean? So people that are listening right now and watching right now, what does it actually mean to be a part of a local church?
I think actually, I think the thing I want to say most is how important it is that I think people actually come to a place where they can answer that question. And not that just they would know that I have an opinion or they would trust even a pastor's opinion, because I actually think the most significant thing that's missing in most people's relationship with the church is because they don't know what it exists for. They place all of these false expectations on it, and then they almost in some ways set themselves up to fail. And I think one of the things that I see so much in people's lives is that they actually have this deep ache for meaning and status and to be known. And instead of actually coming to a church to actually be part of it, they come to a church almost expecting it to satisfy parts of their life that only Jesus can.
Yep.
And so and honestly, sometimes I feel like people are trying to prostitute the church to take from it things to make them feel better about themselves. And not to say that a church shouldn't satisfy some needs and it shouldn't enter into some of those places that are really meaningful. But I think if we go into church with the wrong initial orientation, I think we're gonna spin out. Because I actually think, what does it mean to belong to a local church? What it means is that you're entering into a family that is on a specific mission, and you are going to, if you want the benefit of family, you're going to pay the cost of family, and you recognize this family has one distinct purpose, which is, I said one. Okay, 2 distinct purposes. I say that sometimes. To continue the...
Sounds more intense when it's one.
It's one.
There's one
in
thing.
in 2 branches.
Maybe 2.
Maybe
but
2.
Maybe 2.
It's 2 sounds less potent.
Right? The church is there to continue the mission of Jesus and for people to mature. And listen, if we're all honest, maturity is going to come with conflict. It's going to come with hard work. It's going to come with submission. It's
costly.
It's costly. And because people don't understand, I mean, this is one of the main parts of Ephesians 4 and talking about the role of the church, that you would grow up. You would mature. You'd stop being tossed to and fro. And if my posture towards a church is I'm going to come and take from it what I want to make my life move forward, then actually you don't even realize it, but from the forefront, you are actually robbing that church from ever being what it's supposed to be in your life, which is a family continuing the mission of Jesus that gets the authority to change your own life.
I think what I love about what you're talking about we need to be able to answer this. For people that grew up in church, so if church really is God's idea, if he's the one that birthed it, he's the one that set it up, he's the one that put this structure in place, then I do think it's important we understand what, why, all of those things. And it's interesting because, every generation probably questions things.
Yeah.
Every generation questions what they were handed at some level.
Yeah.
So the form of church that we were handed came from, the generation before us, and so we challenge and question that. But I really do think we need to be able to answer what you're talking about. What is it?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people either it's just tradition, it's just, I don't know, you just go to church.
Right.
Or for me, what I found when I came down, I've always, since I was 17 and got involved, when I really went after God, I've always tithed. And I've always tried to be generous. It was taught, but it's what we do. It's what you do as a believer. When I came down to plant the church, I realized I do this and believe deeply in it, but not sure I can articulate from Scripture why.
Yep.
It was an intriguing thing. It took me about 2 years of teaching every week a little bit on.
Right.
It's something I believed deeply. It's something I absolutely believed was biblical and from the Lord, but had a hard time a little bit articulating it. And I think I think more than ever, which is always the statement, more than ever, more than any time in history, at this moment, more than ever, there's one, maybe two things I'd like to say. I think that we really have to be able to, one, really deeply understand that why God birthed the church, the role of the church, what it is, so that we can interact properly with it. And that we can grow and mature and all those type of things, but also so that we can help other people along as well. Like this isn't kind of like a whether you go or don't go, whether you're involved or not involved, whether and the statistics are, people come every other week or whatever else. So like this is not something that we're to deal with flippantly or casually or carelessly with. Like it's an integral part of the life of a believer. And I think that everybody will have an opinion about, well, you can be the church here and you can be the church there. And it's not the building, it's not all that type of stuff. But whatever it is an integral part. And this is why we talk about it on this podcast.
Right.
Like I know that we're all pastors, but we're not talking about this just because we have churches. We're talking about this because this podcast is about coming alongside people to encourage them, to equip them, to challenge them so that they will grow, so that they will further the work of Jesus. And so we can't say we have a heart for you to grow.
Right.
We have a heart for you to experience the fullness of all that God has for you without stopping and saying, do you understand the role of the church? And have you gone down that road, not just because, I don't know, I grew up going to church, what you do on Sunday mornings, right?
And the deep conviction that every single one of us carries that you actually cannot experience the fullness of God if you are not planted in a spiritual community in the church. So it's that conviction.
We'll have that
drives
conversation
us.
because there's a lot of people that would absolutely disagree with you.
Yep.
And I agree with you.
Right.
But yeah, that's the big one. Like I don't need that in order to have a relationship. But what do you think, Ed?
So I'm thinking about Acts chapter 2, and as the church gets birthed, it says in Acts chapter 2:42, they gave themselves to Jesus' teaching, they gave themselves to prayer, they gave themselves to the breaking of bread, worship, declaring Jesus is Lord, and to koinonia. And scholars have said that word koinonia carries this idea that I'm as committed to the family of God as I am to God Himself. So there seems to be this, like I call it Acts 2:42 calling, that they gave themselves, like one of the strongest words in the language, devoted. They devoted themselves. So there seems to be this I'm called to Jesus, His way of life. I'm called to His family. I'm called to prayer. I'm called to break bread, break my life open in community. And from that place, like if you kind of follow the story along, from that place of I'm given to people, like I'm given to the church, that was Jesus' idea, Jesus' design. In Acts 6, they begin to discover their gifting. So if kind of from calling to gifting, then in Acts chapter 13, they're discovering their unique assignments. And something you said made me think that I think that there's.
Let me just stop here just for a second. Because it's usually you who's bringing up the scriptures and unpacking
I
things.
feel
Do you
the
feel
pain.
him?
Yes,
do you
I
feel
do.
a little intimidated
Yes,
right
I
now?
do.
Like,
Yeah.
do you feel that right now? Do you feel this is what it feels like? He just kind of gave a quick overview and synopsis of Acts 2.
The church. Come on.
He just kind of
This is the church.
kind of laid out a synopsis
Just off the cuff.
of a few things. Right.
Yeah.
What's it feel like? How's it
Yeah.
feel like? Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
So here-
hopefully you've learned your lesson, Phil.
Come on.
Go ahead.
Come on, I love Phil.
Go ahead.
So here's what I want to get at. There's a gifting and an anointing, an assignment that actually flows out of a deep devotion
Yes.
to actually be a part of the church. And what I'm afraid happens, and I think it's tragic for many people. I think they try church, they jump into Acts 2, but they aren't fully devoted long enough to get to Acts 6 or Acts 13, because I think there's a deficit right now of people actually staying in the church long enough to discover their gifting, Holy Spirit gifting, let alone the assignment of God. So you've got crowds of people that like, I tried church, I came in, maybe I liked the message, the music, but they didn't realize, no, like I'm actually called to church. And I think that's where I've had some pretty, I think, significant conversations with young people going, nah, I don't know, it's kind of me and Jesus, or I just hang out with friends. I really believe there's a calling. There's an Acts 2:42 calling where I'm actually committed to the church. And from that place, some of the gifts that God's hidden in community start to get revealed for those that will actually stay in community long enough.
So so answer these questions for me. People say, well, I am the church, so wherever I go, we are the church. Which there's truth in a lot of this type of stuff. Like, so like we don't have to gather to be the church.
That's right.
But I'm saying, do we believe that?
Yeah.
Biblically, do we believe that? As far as like that gathering isn't actually needed. Now, let's just preface this. Of course, we don't believe that the church consists of a Sunday morning gathering.
Right.
That's
We believe
right.
the church is a lot bigger than that. But when people say like, hey, we are the church wherever we go,
Yeah.
and then therefore we don't actually need to gather.
Yeah. What I can say about that is people who live that way tend to live very small and disconnected. And I've found very little fruit from people's lives that are like, it's just me and Jesus, or just me and my roommate, or because biblically, yeah, you are the church. The church isn't a place, it's people. So yeah, you are the church. It's not a place you go. But there's something, I think, stunning, fruitful, and Jesus-like. If Jesus committed himself to walk with 12, and that's how he birthed this church, then why would we think that we could do something different? And so I do think theologically, sure, like go be the church, but together. And I think what we're talking about, there's big C church, like those that have come into the family of God through salvation. But then there's theology of local church. And I think part of what we're talking about is there's something about a group of people committed to be on mission for a season. And in committing to a group of people on mission, Phil, as you said, a group of people that are going after the kingdom in a certain way that I think there's something stunning and fruitful from that if you aren't committed to do that with a group of people, you end up living disconnected. Yeah, you're the church, but you make a very little impact from what I've seen.
Let me ask this real quick, because this is a big one too. And there's people that are listening to this from around the world, different nations. It's really actually, we love the international family that we have around the world that jump on the podcast with us. But I can speak for America. We obviously have a very independent streak to us. Have a very kind of independent mindset. This is mine. This is my space. This is my property.
Wow.
This is this is just how we think. But sometimes, and I want you, Phil, to talk about this, because sometimes people, when they say, well, just me and my roommate, we do a Bible study, we're the church. When I look at the New Testament, I think, man, the church has a lot more involved with it. And one of the things involved with it is an actual leadership structure. Yes. There's an actual that they spent a lot of time laying out.
Right.
There's an actual governmental structure of elders and apostles and prophets and teachers and pastors and overseers, and like there's an actual structure that sometimes when people go like, we can just be the church anywhere. I'm like, I think there's an actually structure that you're supposed to be connected to. It's not just like a free-for-all. There are actual governmental leadership positions in the church that are a part of. That's why when you say, well, can I just be the church anywhere? Of course you're part of the global family of God.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But that global family of God consists of
Yes.
leadership structures that are shepherding, leading, feeding,
Yeah.
equipping, teaching. And you have to take out quite a bit of the New Testament to somehow
right.
walk away with thinking that you don't have to be connected into something that's
Right.
actually structural by nature. What would your stance on that be, or take?
Yeah.
Or
No, I mean, I think we all admit, right? There's this kind of individualism we see inside of people, or even in the statement of, well, I am the church, or wherever we are the church. There's a right rebuke towards, hypocritical thinking that says,
Yes.
okay, I go to church.
Yes.
But then I do whatever I want to, right? So there's part of that statement from that spirit where, like, of
or
course we
people
agree with
use
that.
it to control. I would say
Yes.
this: pastors would use it to get everybody to come to every small group, every
Yes.
prayer gathering.
right.
If you're not at every
Yep.
prayer gathering, if you're not involved in a
Right.
small group, if you don't come every single Sunday morning, whatever else, then you are somehow not.
Right.
And that is, and I do agree that
So-
that is a good rebuke.
So yeah, I want to honor that one side of it, but I guess in the opposite of I actually think it's incredibly dangerous, because I actually think it's so anti-biblical and it's anti-Christ in its posture. Like I think you guys, how many times I sit with people who've read a third of the Bible twice, and suddenly they have this robust theology on why they don't need to be a part of the church, and you just, your heart grieves and is frustrated, because at the end of the day, a biblically illiterate generation could just say and do whatever they want to do,
Okay,
and they
so-
don't realize how blind they are. Because if you cancel out the fellowship of believers, the submission to elders, and the life of partnering with a local church, you cannot operate in the fullness of God forever. God says he gave his fullness to the church, and that's not talking about a concept of you just belonging. He's talking about the fullness of God gets expressed in local church context by you, Philippians 2, laying down your life for your covenant community, choosing the best of other people, and you and your buddy in a dorm room doing church
And
is
there's
not
structure
that.
involved in that.
There's structure.
Same way there's structure involved in family.
And I get that there could be manipulative leaders. There have been unhealthy
Controlling
churches.
leaders.
I understand. So I'm not advocating staying in an unhealthy church
But the
context.
same thing, there's
but-
unhealthy families.
Right.
I have to continually say, when I talk about family, I constantly put healthy in front of it.
Yes.
I say, just if you know what healthy family is, because
Yes.
there is broken,
Wow.
dysfunctional, unhealthy family. And so that analogy doesn't work for some people, because they're
Right.
like, I had a dad who abused me, a mom that left me,
Yep.
whatever else. And so we have to say, no, healthy family.
Right.
And in the same way, we would say, there's healthy church and unhealthy. There's healthy leadership and unhealthy
Because this is
leadership.
what I see happening all the time, is people are making significant decisions out of reaction. And I've told so
That's
many
right.
people this. Anytime you're making a decision out of a reaction, your decision is wrong. Like, reaction is not the foundation of good decision making. Jesus is the only factor of good decision making. And this is what I would challenge anyone. You actually spend an entire year reading the New Testament multiple times and prove to me you can come away with any theology of the church that gets you out of it. It's impossible. So the only way you get there
So
is
you
because
could do it.
You've gotten your hurt, and I honor that hurt,
Yes.
and then you've formed theologies out of your hurt.
Dude, I'm just floored that you said you have people in your church that have read a third of the Bible twice. I would give anything for those people.
Where are they?
You have people reading the Bible. Like, I would
There are
give
people
anything.
reading
When you
Bible
said that, I
daily.
was like, are you kidding me?
People
Like,
are hungry for the
like
word of God.
a third of the Bible twice.
Yeah.
I mean, that would be good theology
yes.
these days. I do think, Phil, like, I love what you said. I do think right now one of our tasks as leaders and pastors and teams is we do have to create the space for people who have been genuinely wounded
Yes.
by unhealthy, dysfunctional church family.
Yes.
And there's been so much of that. We have to create as much space on that end to go, wow, we're trying to actually build something that's healthy, and we're not going to get it right. We're not going to get it perfect. But some of the stories we've all heard from people, we would go like nightmares.
Right.
And so I think creating the space to allow people to, leaders that are able to create that space are going to become the healthy fathers and mothers of the future church.
Right.
All right, let me ask this question. Last question, then we're going to be done. and I have an answer to this question, so I'm going to ask you guys, but I have an opinion on it. So let's
have an opinion?
Yeah, let's see if you guys line up with my opinion. Do you have to stay in one church your whole life? Can you ever leave church?
That's a great question.
Can you leave and go to another church? Is that disloyal? Do you have to stay in one church the rest of your life? I have a little bit of a pet peeve sometimes when pastors are like, these are my people. So I'm going to tell you already, I have a little bit of slant towards that. But answer that question.
Yeah, I would love to, because it's actually really personal right now. After pastoring a church for 13 years.
You're thinking about going to Bethel?
8 minutes down the road, and I'm considering.
You're debating. Is it all right if I, as a senior pastor, go to another church?
Am I ready to graduate from Bethel Light to the real thing? That's what you're asking.
It's the JV and varsity. That's okay. Go ahead.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Banning. Love you. I think when we are young and we start a church and we're gathering a core team, I think there's a sense of these people will be with us forever. There's that sense of like, hey, we're in covenant together. I couldn't imagine this church, the Stirring, without you or this couple or this family. And then you realize that that's just it's not life. It's not real. So I've come to, over the past few years, through a lot of pain and really a lot of pastoral heartache, develop what I kind of call a theology of scattering, where, God calls people for seasons. And as pastors, we need to recognize when God's actually transitioning people and sending them out, because I'm not convinced that we're supposed to keep people. Yeah. And recently, some friends of ours that had been a part of the church for 13 years, they helped us plant the church. In a day, they made the decision to leave and walk out. It was so deeply painful. And I had this conversation with my wife. My wife's trying to encourage me. The next morning, I woke up and I was praying it through, because there's a real sense of loss. Like why would they leave? What did I do? And the Lord said this: I didn't call you to keep people. I called you to release people. Yeah. And there's a sense of John 17 where Jesus said, I was faithful with the ones you entrusted to me. And I just believe there are seasons of God where he brings you people. And right now it's like, I want to be as loving and as faithful and as kind to invest in those people that God brings us for a season, and realizing that we're not going to run with the same people forever. Yeah. And I wish I would have learned that early on, because it would have saved me a lot of heartache as people walk out. Rather than take it personal, I realized there's actually seasons where hey, it's time to go. And in the scattering of God, it's actually healthier for the kingdom. Yeah. Yeah.
Your answer is so kind. It makes me, it
took him a while to get there.
It took a long while.
I'm just saying. No, it took him a while to get to the kind part in his heart. So
you've been pastoring for how long?
I'm feeling this.
How many years in?
As a senior pastor? 8 years.
8 years, all right. Okay, yeah. So you'll get there.
I'm getting there.
You'll get kind.
No,
eventually you just won't care.
I 100% agree with your statement. And actually, I mean, because, I've never had anyone leave a church I've pastored before.
Ever.
Just never. It's just
ever.
I'm
ever.
People, I realize via podcast, people can't see the sarcasm in my eyes. But people don't know, unless you've been in the role of a senior pastor, how much you love people who leave.
That's right.
How personal it is, and it's such a tricky thing. And I just love your heart, because it's 100% true. The idea that I have any sense of ownership or control, possession, it's flawed and broken. And so the only thing I would say,
and that somehow Jesus doesn't have a right to send people where he wants them.
That's right.
But what we're dealing with, and I don't know if you're going to go there, is it is heartbreaking when people leave because of offense, because of independence, because of rebellion, not because Jesus is sending them, but because there's something else going on. And people may have to go find that journey, but that's a hard one for sure.
Yeah, it is a hard one, because one, I mean, you feel it. I would be lying to you if I didn't admit that I feel it personally. But if I also detach myself personally, it's what we talked about earlier. It's what you can see that the person you're sitting next to cannot, which is that there's a reason their life isn't flourishing. And it's because they bounce from community to, they don't develop roots, they don't work through hard things, they don't learn how to forgive. And so your heart's grieving in these ways for them, because you realize they're gonna stay stuck in the same thing. So I would just say, I wish people would be willing to work harder through hurt and
Yeah.
offense and immaturity before they
Absolutely.
leave, and people would be far
Absolutely.
more free
Yes.
to be sent in their leaving.
Yeah. But
that's
somehow
it.
it's not
Beautiful.
always a disloyal
No.
kind of thing if
No.
somehow the Lord moves you to another church or whatever
And
else.
I've learned, as much as this hurts my ego, that there are things people who were with me that I longed for them to learn that they just, for some reason in my environment, and then they leave and it hurts.
Is it hard to admit that I'm not the complete package?
And then they go to another church and they figure it out,
Yeah,
and God moves in their life. And so this is where we just have to trust the sovereignty of God and the
That's right.
and the big
Yeah.
church and the beauty of the whole church, and that I'm really a very
Yeah.
very tiny part of it.
Yeah.
And I just want to
right.
be faithful.
That's right.
Well, guys, thanks for jumping on and having the conversation today. It's kind of fun to do this in person.
is fun.
We're usually over
know.
Zoom calls. Nate, thanks for coming and hanging out with us. I am actually genuinely excited, guys. This is going to be the crew right here that's going to be launching the Pastors Podcast.
Let's go.
I'm excited for everybody. If you're a pastor, if you work on staff at a church, then be looking for that. And but thanks for talking about the church. And just know, man, all of you guys, we really do love you.
Yes.
This conversation for me is not just because I'm a pastor, and so my job is church, and so I want people. My job is to see people thriving, flourishing, experiencing all that God has for them, equipped for all that He has for them. So thanks for jumping on, guys. As always, you can get on iTunes, leave a review, leave a comment, press the stars. Unless it's 1 or 2, then don't do it.
That's
But if
just
it's
not
higher
nice.
than 4, go ahead and feel
4
free
up.
to do it. 4 up, feel free to breathe. So we'll see you again.